The air in the boardroom didn't just turn cold, it crystallized into a sharp, jagged edge. It was the sound of a $42 million empire collapsing into a quiet folder on a mahogany table. They thought they were trimming the fat, but they accidentally severed the spine. The mahogany table was polished to such a high gloss that Sarah could see her own reflection, distorted and shimmering like a ghost in the wood. Across from her sat Marcus, the CFO, a man whose tailored suit seemed to be the only thing holding his ego together. He didn't look like a man about to commit a $42 million blunder. He looked like a man who had just won a game of solitaire and thought he'd conquered the world. The office air smelled faintly of expensive espresso and the sterile, metallic scent of high-end air filtration, the scent of corporate optimization. "Let's be realistic, Sarah," Marcus began, his voice sliding across the room like oil on silk. He leaned back, his fingers interlaced over a silk tie that cost more than a month of most people's rent. "Your department's overhead is significant. We've crunched the numbers, we've looked at the KPIs, and frankly, we can hire 2 people for your current salary. 2 hungry, fresh Ivy League grads who haven't grown quite so comfortable in their roles." He punctuated the sentence with a smirk, a tiny, twitching movement of the lips that signaled he thought he held all the cards. To Marcus, Sarah was just a line item, a series of digits in a spreadsheet that needed to be rounded down. He saw the cost of her presence, but he was fundamentally blind to the value of her silence. He didn't see the invisible thread she held, the delicate web of trust she had spun over a decade with clients who didn't care about corporate hierarchies, but cared deeply about the person who kept their empire stable. Sarah didn't flinch. She watched a single dust mote dance in a stray beam of afternoon sun. She thought about the global Apex account, the $42 million heartbeat of the firm. She thought about the CEO of Apex, a man who didn't take calls from fresh grads or optimized departments. 2 people, Sarah repeated softly, her voice a calm contrast to the predatory hum of the office. She tilted her head, observing Marcus as if he were a curious biological specimen. The irony was almost poetic. The man hired to protect the company's capital was about to incinerate its most valuable bridge because he couldn't distinguish between a price tag and a cornerstone. "At least 2," Marcus added, emboldened by her quietness. He mistook her composure for defeat. In his mind, he was the hero of the quarterly review, the giant slayer who had found a way to squeeze an extra percentage point out of the operational budget. He was already drafting the internal memo in his head, a masterpiece of corporate jargon celebrating synergy and leanness. But the atmosphere in the room was shifting. Outside the glass walls, the bustling hive of the marketing floor continued, oblivious to the fact that the queen bee was being handed her walking papers. Sarah felt a strange sense of lightness, a shedding of weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. It was the clarity that comes just before a storm breaks, the moment when the wind dies down and the sky turns a bruised electric purple. She stood up. The movement was fluid, devoid of the frantic energy Marcus expected. There was no pleading, no listing of achievements, no desperate defense of her ROI. She simply smoothed her skirt, the fabric whispering against her skin, and reached across the vast mahogany divide. "I understand, Marcus," she said, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "I hope they provide exactly what you're looking for." As she shook his hand, she felt the dryness of his palm, the hand of a man who dealt in paper, not people. She knew that within 48 hours, the fresh grads would be staring at a ringing phone they didn't know how to answer, while a $42 million relationship began to dissolve like sugar in the rain. The truly terrifying thing about a blind spot isn't that you can't see what's there. It's that you don't even know the space is empty until something massive falls through it. The elevator ride down was the quietest 30 seconds of Sarah's life. As the brushed metal doors slid shut, sealing out the muffled hum of the executive floor, she watched the floor numbers count down like a timer on a detonator. She wasn't angry. She was focused. There is a specific kind of serenity that comes when you realize the people in charge are steering a ship toward an iceberg they've mistaken for a cloud. By the time she reached the lobby, her phone was already buzzing in her handbag. It was a rhythmic, persistent vibration, the digital heartbeat of a crisis beginning to form. She didn't check it. Instead, she walked out into the afternoon air, which felt unseasonably crisp, carrying the scent of rain and roasting coffee from the street vendors. She took a deep breath, the oxygen hitting her lungs like a cold shot of reality. Back on the 42nd floor, Marcus was likely high-fiving the HR director, oblivious to the fact that Sarah hadn't just left her desk. She had taken the secret sauce of their largest account with her, locked safely inside her head. The Global Apex account wasn't built on contracts or legal jargon, though the lawyers liked to think so. It was built on Sunday morning phone calls about market volatility and the fact that Sarah knew exactly how the CEO, Arthur Vance, liked his data presented: raw, honest, and without the corporate fluff Marcus loved so dearly. To Marcus, Sarah was a $250,000 expense. To Arthur Vance, Sarah was the only person in that building who spoke his language. 36 hours. That's all it took for the vacuum Sarah left behind to start sucking the air out of the room. It began with a routine check-in call from the two people Marcus had hired to replace her. They were bright-eyed, energetic, and completely out of their depth. They followed the script. They used the approved client-facing terminology. And within 5 minutes, they had insulted Arthur Vance's intelligence by trying to explain his own industry to him, using a PowerPoint deck Sarah would have laughed out of the room. By hour 24, the board panic started to leak through the cracks. The office atmosphere, usually a polished facade of productivity, began to smell like ozone before a lightning strike. People were scurrying. Marcus's office door, usually open to signal his transparency, was slammed shut so hard the glass vibrated. The smirk was gone, replaced by a gray ash-like pallor that no amount of expensive espresso could mask. Sarah, meanwhile, sat in a small independent bistro 3 blocks away, watching the rain streak the windows. She had turned her work phone off, but her personal one was a graveyard of urgent emails and please call me texts from the board of directors. They weren't asking about her transition plan anymore. They were begging for a fire extinguisher. The metaphor of the lean company is a dangerous one. When you trim the fat until you hit bone, the structure stops moving. The board was staring at a $42 million exit report, a document that represented more than just lost revenue. It was a public declaration of incompetence. Arthur Vance hadn't just moved his business. He had sent a clear message. I don't do business with spreadsheets. I do business with experts. The boardroom, once Sarah's battlefield, had become a tomb of silence. The $42 million wasn't just a number on a page. It was a ghost sitting in her empty chair, mocking the men who thought they could replace a decade of intuition with 2 entry-level salaries and a can-do attitude. In the world of high-stakes business, the most expensive person in the room isn't the one with the highest salary. It's the one whose absence cost you everything you've built. If this story feels uncomfortably familiar, it's because corporate optimization often mistakes the price of a person for the value of their impact. Don't let your career become a line item on a spreadsheet managed by someone who doesn't understand the craft. Are you ready to move from being an expense to becoming an irreplaceable asset? Join our community of high-level strategists and industry leaders. The silence in the boardroom was no longer the respectful hush of a professional gathering. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure of a tomb. At the head of the table sat the chairman, a man whose silver hair and weathered face usually radiated a calm authority. Today, he looked like he was staring at a crime scene. In front of him lay the $42 million client exit report, 3 pages of clinical cold data that translated to a catastrophic collapse of the company's quarterly projections. Marcus sat to his right, though he seemed to have shrunk. His tailored suit, once armor, now looked several sizes too large. The smirk had been replaced by a frantic, twitching focus on his notepad, where he was doodling meaningless geometric shapes. He looked like a man trying to calculate how many fresh grads it would take to plug a $42 million hole in a sinking hull. Explain it to me again, Marcus, the chairman said, his voice dangerously low. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation to a funeral. Walk me through the logic of saving $200,000 by forfeiting $42 million. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I must be missing the brilliance of the math. Marcus cleared his throat, the sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. We followed the optimization protocols, sir. The KP has indicated that Sarah's role was over-leveraged relative to market averages. We brought in two highly qualified associates. They followed the scripts perfectly. The scripts? The chairman looked up, his eyes narrowing into flinty points. Arthur Vance doesn't read scripts, Marcus. He hasn't read a script since the Nixon administration. He expects a partner. He expects someone who knows why his supply chain in Singapore stalled 3 years ago without having to look at a dashboard. He expects Sarah. The room felt smaller. The atmospheric pressure of board panic is a physical thing. It makes the lights seem too bright and the air feel recycled and thin. On the wall, the digital ticker showing the company's internal valuation seemed to flicker, a silent reminder that news of the Apex exit would hit the market by morning. The mistake Marcus had made wasn't just a financial one. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of what the company actually sold. They didn't sell services. They sold the peace of mind that Sarah provided. Outside the window, a storm was finally breaking over the city. Fat, heavy drops of rain lashed against the glass, blurring the skyline into a gray smear. Inside, the only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the rhythmic tapping of the chairman's pen against the exit report. I've spent the morning on the phone with Arthur, the chairman continued, ignoring Marcus's attempt to speak. Do you know what he told me? He said he didn't care about the new fee structure. He didn't care about the enhanced digital portal your new team tried to sell him. He said, and I quote, "I don't trust a house where the architect is replaced by the bricklayers." Every 2 paragraphs, the realization hit someone else at the table. The legal counsel looked at his shoes. The COO began checking his own contract's severance clause. The ship wasn't just leaking. The engine had been tossed overboard to save on fuel weight. The chairman stood up, the chair screeching against the floor like a wounded animal. He leaned over the table, casting a long, dark shadow over the CFO. 36 hours, Marcus. That's how long it took for you to dismantle a decade of trust. You wanted to hire 2 people for her salary? Fine. You'd better hope one of them knows how to perform a miracle, because the other one is going to be busy updating your LinkedIn profile. The irony was a bitter pill that Marcus was finally forced to swallow. In his quest to be the smartest man in the room, he had become the most expensive liability on the payroll. He had optimized the company into a state of terminal efficiency. The danger of viewing people as resources is that you eventually forget they are the only things keeping your assets from becoming liabilities. The aftermath of a corporate disaster doesn't always look like a frantic trade floor. Sometimes it looks like a quiet office at 7 p.m., where the optimized staff are staring at screens they no longer understand. The 2 new hires, Marcus's hungry Ivy Leaguers, were still at their desks. Their faces were illuminated by the harsh blue light of their monitors, looking pale and exhausted. They had the energy Marcus wanted, but they lacked the one thing Sarah possessed: the historical memory of the firm. They were searching through folders, trying to find the strategy for the Apex account, not realizing that the strategy wasn't a PDF. It was a series of unspoken promises and a deep understanding of Arthur Vance's personal brand of paranoia. You can't search for intuition in a shared drive. Marcus's office was dark, but the light under the CEO's door remained a sharp, accusing line across the carpet. The atmosphere had shifted from panic to a heavy, stagnant realization. The board panic had evolved into a cold calculation of survival. When the $42 million vanished, it didn't just take the profit with it. It took the company's reputation for stability. In the high-stakes world of consulting, once the safe pair of hands is gone, every other client starts looking at the exit. Sarah's desk had been cleared of her personal effects, but her presence felt more substantial than the people currently sitting near it. The empty space was a vacuum, pulling in the anxiety of the entire floor. Every time a phone rang, there was a collective flinch. Everyone knew it was another client asking why the Sarah standard was no longer being met. The irony of the two-for-one deal was now a running joke in the break room, whispered over bitter coffee. Marcus had bought 2 hammers to replace one master architect, and he was surprised that the house was falling down. He had focused on the input, salary, while completely ignoring the output, integrity and retention. By 9 p.m., the chairman walked out of the CEO's office. He didn't look at the new hires. He didn't look at Marcus's closed door. He looked at the elevator, the same one Sarah had used to leave 36 hours prior. He realized that the cost-cutting measure had been the most expensive gamble in the firm's history. The office was a graveyard of smart decisions. The metadata showed 1,000 emails sent, but the balance sheet showed a catastrophic 0 in the trust column. They had reached peak efficiency. They were now perfectly capable of doing absolutely nothing for the most important people in their world. Efficiency is a ghost town if there's no soul left to inhabit the structures you've built. You can't automate the feeling of being in capable hands. The finality of the situation didn't arrive with a bang, but with a quiet digital ping. At 10 a.m. the following morning, the official termination notice from Global Apex landed in the CEO's inbox. It wasn't a draft. It wasn't a negotiation tactic. It was a clean, surgical removal of $42 million from the firm's future. The 2 people Marcus had hired were currently in a conference room, trying to brainstorm a recovery deck, unaware that they were performing an autopsy on a body that had already left the morgue. The office felt like a museum dedicated to a lost civilization. Sarah's old office, now inhabited by a stack of boxes and a generic work hard, stay humble poster, was a testament to the arrogance of the spreadsheet. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it he was working from home, a corporate euphemism for hiding until the storm passed or his severance was finalized. The irony reached its peak when the mid-morning mail arrived. It was a bouquet of flowers addressed to Sarah, a thank you, from a smaller client she had helped through a crisis months ago. The receptionist stared at the card, then at the empty desk, then back at the flowers. In a world of digital optimization, the physical evidence of human connection felt like an artifact from a different era. The board meeting that afternoon was short. There were no smirks. There were no PowerPoint decks. There was only a printed sheet of paper showing the projected loss of secondary accounts, the domino effect of the Apex exit. Other clients had smelled the blood in the water. They realized that if the firm was willing to let Sarah walk, they were willing to let anyone walk. The cost-saving measure was now being recalculated as a total brand devaluation. The chairman sat alone after the others had left. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It went to voicemail. "Sarah," he said, his voice sounding tired, stripped of its executive armor. "I think we both know that Marcus made a catastrophic error. I'd like to discuss a restructuring. Not of your salary, but of the entire firm. Name your terms." He waited, listening to the silence on the other end of the line. But Sarah wasn't waiting for a restructuring. She was already sitting in a sun-drenched office across town, a boutique firm she'd helped a friend start years ago. Arthur Vance was on the other line, laughing about a joke they'd shared back in 2018. She wasn't an expense there. She was the foundation. The $42 million mistake wasn't the loss of the money. It was the belief that excellence is a commodity that can be bought in bulk and managed by those who don't understand the price of a soul. The silence in the old boardroom was finally complete. The lights dimmed automatically, sensing no movement. In the dark, the mahogany table still shone, but there was no one left who knew how to turn its polished surface into a bridge. You can buy a person's time, and you can buy their physical presence at a desk. But you cannot buy the loyalty of their clients or the weight of their wisdom once you've shown them they are replaceable.